We humans are silly things. We crave to know. We simply have to have an answer. But we're not so concerned with getting the right answer or arriving at truth. We just need an explanation. We need some narrative that can be working for us. I'm sure you can think of many examples for yourself, whether it is you waiting for a diagnosis from a doctor, waiting to find out why someone left, waiting to figure out if something tragic was intentional or an accident, and 1,000 other things and situations that you can put yourself in. And can you recall the moment that you began to get an explanation, the very instant someone explained it to you? Ah, the relief. Like, literally the relief. We know what happens physiologically when someone is getting an explanation. Their breathing slows, the muscles loosen, the mental looping stops. And the funny thing about this relief is it happens before we've even had a chance to assess if the explanation we're getting is true. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. The fact that humans are not truth-seeking creatures. We are instead uncertainty-reducing creatures. So I want to talk about this today because I believe that it matters. These explanations shape us. They shape our belief, our morality, our politics, our identities. And we need to understand this so we don't keep making the same mistake, which is assuming that comfort equals truth. It does not. Now, there's a ton of evolutionary biology research that has gone on that shows that the human brain developed over time to assess threats. Verifying accuracy is just an afterthought, something that is nice if and when it works out. But detecting danger is primary. You know what keeps that threat detection system activated? Uncertainty. And that kind of ambiguity triggers some things in us. Elevated cortisol, that's the stress hormone. Heightened amygdala activity, again, the fear center of the brain. And rumination and mental looping. And for any of you that have ever been stuck in that before, you know that there is nothing else productive going on in your life. We actually have studies that prove that people experience more stress from uncertainty than they do a bad or negative answer or result. There's a famous psychological study where, on average, people were much happier to receive a mild shock purposefully over the threat of a potential shock that had a good chance of not even happening. If that doesn't just sum up humanity, I don't know what does. Bad news is often easier than waiting for news. This has been so true to me. Just tell me. Let's get this over with. Rip off the Band-Aid. Sometimes it just feels like I can deal with anything, no matter how bad it is, except for that middle ground of not knowing, not being sure what's coming. And then look at how we respond as humans to tragedy. We immediately want to assign a cause, a reason, a meaning to it, even if it doesn't make sense. That's why things like, oh, it's all God's plan, or the universe works everything out, or karma, all of those things are so useful despite their truth value, because it allows us to put a label on something and then be done with it. We don't have to struggle in the unknown, or worse, accept the fact that sometimes bad things just happen. And so I want to introduce you to a term here. It's called cognitive closure, which is simply just the psychological desire to reach a clear, definite answer, and again, avoid that ambiguity, even at the cost of accuracy. This term comes from a social psychologist, Ari Kruglansky, who's known for his foundational work on motivation and belief formation. Fascinating stuff. And he shows the real negative downside of this kind of psychological trap. How our need for closure shapes our identity, our ideology, our dogmatism, and our resistance to evidence. Listed then are 5 key components that I want to make you aware of. First is the preference for order. Disorder feels threatening, order feels secure, feels safe. We don't like chaos. We don't like the unknown. Second is the intolerance of ambiguity. Open questions create anxiety. We don't like that. We'd like to think it creates curiosity, but no, anxiety. Third is urgency, the desire to reach an answer quickly as possible. Come on, let's hear it. Give it to me. Why? Then where a lot of the danger comes from, the permanence is the fourth one. Once an answer is reached, we don't want to revisit it. We don't want to do the hard work of double checking or rethinking ourselves or being open to new information or differing evidence. And lastly is something he calls seizing and freezing. Grab the first explanation you can and hold on to it. Seize and freeze. Now, I know it's easy to want to make fun of this, to say that this is so stupid. And it's negative, it can be harmful, but it's not really stupidity. It's a survival adaptation with a negative byproduct, especially in our further advanced complex world from when this first originated in our brains. Our brains just haven't had time to catch up to our current conditions. Let's move on from cognitive closure, and I'm going to introduce you to another new term, the illusion of explanatory depth. This, simply put, is our tendency to believe that we understand especially complex systems far better than we actually do. Rosenblit is a cognitive scientist who really put this to the forefront, studying how people overestimate their understanding of everyday mechanisms. Here's the classic findings. People generally rate their understanding as high, but then when they are asked to explain whatever it is they claim they understand well, in detail, the confidence begins to collapse. And then after trying that very simple exercise, people re-rate their understanding much lower. So it might be framed as, hey, do you know how a zipper works? Yeah, I definitely know how a zipper works. Cool. Explain it. Oh, maybe I don't. How does anesthesia stop pain? How does memory physically store itself? Maybe the point that I want you to pull from this is, again, that familiarity alone, which causes the feeling of understanding, does not equal understanding itself. This ties into when we get that explanation. It's doing more work than just relieving our anxiety. It's also inflating our confidence. That makes weak explanations feel sufficient and thus discourage further inquiry. This, as you can see, is where things get really bad. Our brains really do seem to be working against us here. Moving to another point here, really getting into explanations and stories and narratives and how this all works together to form our identity and what that means. So getting back to some of the evolutionary explanation here, we evolved in small groups and stories transmitted survival information. At this point, there's no statistics or data, and so we create this cognitive hierarchy of what persuades us most. Guess what's at the top? Stories. What was I just watching? Oh, Presumed Innocent. Have you guys seen that? I just watched all 8 episodes. It was fantastic. Makes me wish I'd been a trial lawyer. But there's this great little scene where they are explaining how little the truth matters in court, especially in lieu of hard evidence. When all you have in this particular case, and I won't give any spoilers away, is a lot of circumstantial evidence, it becomes about which side can tell the best story to the jury. Stories are what persuade us. Then intentional agents, moral causation, purpose, and then evidence. This is what is found in these studies, that anecdotes consistently outperform statistics in these what they call persuasion studies. We know that just one vivid, well-crafted, and articulated story outweighs thousands of data points. In fact, I remember hearing this, and I don't have all the details. This is just me recounting something I heard a long time ago, but I think it fits, and I'm pretty sure it would be true. Something to the effect of, when trying to get people to give as much money towards charity, they've done the A/B testing. You can present to your fundraising crowd all of the data and stats. Here is where your money goes. Here is what it does. For every dollar you give, you will do X with it. You'll save this many lives, whatever the case might be. And yes, many people give. But when you scrap all of that, or you lead with, hey, I want to introduce you to Timmy. Here's a picture of Timmy before. Here's his horrendous life story. But Sally over there last year gave X amount, and look at Timmy today, and you craft this narrative. Not even saying it's untrue, right? It might even very well represent the statistics that we're told over here. But when that story is delivered, the funding is even higher than just the statistics. And that may make sense to you, but that's actually really fascinating. Something that intrigues me, and I think that's where I probably read that, is effective altruism. The idea of doing good better, of being more efficient with where you give. And there's a ton of weird, problematic things that have happened with that movement. but in general, it should be a pretty attractive idea. Hey, I have X% of my income I'm willing to part with to do good in the world. Should I not care about how efficient I am being? Or is it just about the good feeling of doing that thing? And then furthermore, why is it more attractive to me to want to give my money to a powerful story over sheer fact about what good can be done with it? Well, the story is powerful for all the reasons we just listed. So sorry, this was a bit of a tangent, but it just got me thinking about these examples. Let me try to get us back on track here. We're talking about explanations and how they serve as emotional regulation, which is something we all desire. And there's nothing wrong with desiring that. But the fact is that those explanations regulate fear more than they explain reality. Explanations soothe our death anxiety, which is a topic that I've talked about before and I want to spend a lot more time on, especially terror management theory. That might be one of our next more psychological episodes like this. By the way, quick time out. Let me know which of these kinds of episodes you like best. We've done some history, some science, some psychology, some philosophy, a lot of myth. What do you want to see more of? And if you haven't subscribed at this point and you're watching this far into a video, please go ahead and subscribe and turn on notifications. That helps a lot on this growing channel. So explanations soothe that death anxiety. They soothe chaos and randomness, the loss of control that so many of us feel and hate, and the moral unpredictability of being a citizen of this universe. A few examples from research that I think highlight this really well. If you give someone some reminders about morality, it actually increases their belief rigidity. It's like an overcompensation trying to take control. Natural disasters tend to increase supernatural belief. Again, we want a reason, we want an answer, an explanation. And crisis increases absolutism. How very, very unfortunate. All of this says to me, an explanation does not need to be true to be effective. It only needs to feel stabilizing. And I think that is why we have such a huge problem in our world around the concepts of truth and people believing so many false things that end up actually being harmful, even if they momentarily comfort by giving an explanation. And then, as I mentioned, that explanation eventually leads to identity. At some point, it stops explaining the rest of the world, and those explanations start explaining you as the individual. And then it starts. It's the belief that leads to the worldview, that leads to the identity, that leads to the tribe. And once a belief, an explanation, is your identity, is how you have placed yourself within a group, within the world to feel comfort and secure, then any challenges to that belief, they literally negatively affect you. From neuroscience, we know this. You strap someone up and question and or challenge their belief. And guess what parts of the brain ping like crazy? There's two. The threat regions and the pain regions. We also know how social rejection is attributed in the brain. It's the same as physical pain. That's why so many conversations around logic and some of the debate things, they often can fall short for many people, because to them, you're not just arguing an idea, you're threatening their psychological shelter. And so with that, let's move into kind of our final point before a closeout. We'll talk a little bit here about letting go and grief and the skill, that's what I believe it is, of uncertainty. Letting go, and this again in context here, letting go of an explanation that comforted you but that you found out wasn't true. Letting go of an ideology, a political system, a religious system. It feels like death because you are actually losing so much. You're losing predictability. You're losing mental clarity, moral clarity as well. You're losing that narrative continuity that has explained everything else in your life. And in many cases, you're losing belonging because, again, it becomes so tribalistic after developing into our identities. Letting go of these explanations, it truly mirrors grief. The denial, the anger, the bargaining, the depression, and hopefully sometimes the acceptance. So it's a big deal to lose these explanations, to be willing to part with them for the sake of truth. That's what's so tricky about truth. It often destabilizes before it clarifies. And then thus growth requires tolerating longer periods of uncertainty. This is intellectual humility. And we actually have some pretty cool research on intellectual humility, or we can just call it a higher tolerance for uncertainty. It correlates with better reasoning, less dogmatism, and greater resilience. Those are 3 good things. And so I think it's important to start to reframe what uncertainty is so that we can feel better about it and be okay with it. Uncertainty is not confusion or weakness. It is a learned psychological strength. That reframing is pivotal. Seriously, it really affects me. Go ask 100 strangers on the street, what do you feel when you hear the word uncertainty? And I bet 99 of them are going to be negative connotations. What if uncertainty was exciting? What if you equated it with potential and possibility instead of all the things your brain tells you will happen in that uncertainty, what it could be? Negative things. Living with uncertainty, being okay with I don't know, is a skill. It can be learned, it can be developed, and once you have it, it is incredibly beneficial. For me, someone who's gone through a great transition of worldview, who lost my community and identity and belonging and comfort with explanations that I found out were not true, I take great solace in one thing, the honesty. The honesty from me to me. Hey, maybe you lost all these things, but you're living in reality. You're brave. You're not afraid. Well, you are afraid, but you're not living out of fear. You're not lowering yourself and your standard just to feel better. It's funny, we know not to condone this anywhere else in life. Drugs do this, but if you had someone in your life that was constantly using drugs for escapism, you'd probably start talking to them at some point about how this might be unhealthy. And yet when people so clearly just accept any explanation, obviously wrong explanations, potentially harmful explanations for that same kind of relief or comfort, it's just life. It's just another day. It's just what humans do. To each their own. I don't get that. So how do we wrap this all up? What positive note can we end on here? Well, hopefully I just gave you one, but if you do need to make a choice between pseudo closure and truth, maybe consider leaning more towards truth. And you can reframe that too. Curiosity over closure. Because yes, explanations are necessary, but premature and or false explanations are dangerous. Comfort is not truth. Confidence is not understanding, and certainty is not wisdom. Honestly, if I had turned the camera on today and I said those 3 things, I would feel like I left you with some shared fire. After all, that is the name of the channel, where the goal is to do 2 things: to illuminate truth and ignite curiosity. The seduction of explanations shuts that down, but curiosity keeps that fire burning. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time. Very curious again to hear what you guys come here for. Regardless though, I appreciate each and every one of you. I'll be back Saturday with a new video, and until then, keep sharing. An unbelievable shout out to our first Inferno patron, Laurie. Thank you for the wonderful generosity. Also to our Blaze tier patrons, Decox, Dark Side of Delight Productions, James Geider, and Noëldivergent, as well as all of our Flame tier patrons that you can see on the screen. All other patrons are Ember tiered and are listed in the description of each video. A sincere thank you to each one of you who allows me to continue to share this fire.